strife, through the struggles. And so I just want to share this as a celebration to you moms, that we have the freedom now because of the freedom that was brought in actually in the 1960s. John Holt was one of the founders of the homeschooling movement because he talked about bringing kids home and teaching them from home again. 100 years later, for that situation, 1850s, 60s was when they mandated school, and 1960s is when they started revolting and fighting back and saying, no, we're going to teach our own kids. So that's a 100-year celebration there. But us as moms and our freedom to feel like we can do those things for our kids, even if it's difficult, even if it's tough. And so I'm going to share a little bit about my story, but I thought that would be cool to just kind of bring in that part of history that has to go along with a celebration, because moms and dads finally broke away from the school mandated system in the 1960s and did that. And so what is it to be a homeschool mom, and why homeschool? As I said, you know, when we started out being moms, when we became parents, we didn't know, we didn't have a manual. We had to trust God, and we had to trust our instincts that He gave us to do this. And so when I first started homeschooling, I actually had felt, because I had grown up a public school kid, and I had, later on in my life, when I went to Bible college, I went to a church that was amazing, and there was a great community of homeschool families. And I actually babysat for homeschool kids, and I went to soccer games with tons of kids who played soccer who were all homeschool. It was a homeschool soccer group, and there were different teams. It was great. And also one of my best friends was a homeschool mom. So I had some background in it, and a little tidbit. When I was growing up, we moved a few times, and one of the times we moved, my parents couldn't get us into the public school there. So for a few months, she had to actually homeschool us. And so I got a taste of homeschool at that moment, and I loved it. So it was years later that I even thought about this, but I loved the experience. One of our projects was we were making granola, and we ended up not putting sugar but putting salt by accident in for the flavoring. And so yeah, my dad loved it and we hated it. But it was a fun experience to do that. So that was my first experience in that. But that came back to me after those years. And for a long time my friend prayed, and she was saying, I'm praying that you'll homeschool. I'm like, okay, you know, thank you. Because I had said I wanted to, and I felt that, you know, I could do it. But at the moment in my life, like all of us experience, there's times in our life where spiritually, emotionally, mentally not at that place. And we need help. We need someone that can support us. So the school system that we were in, we had a Christian lady who taught my daughter in kindergarten, and then my son ended up being in her kindergarten class. And so at the time, that before I took my children out, my daughter had just entered first grade, and my son was entering kindergarten with this lady. And so our experience had been good, and I knew the Lord was helping us at that moment because He was patient. He's a loving Father. He's a loving teacher. And He helps us all along the way. And He knows. And he knows what we're going through. So He's patient in helping us to get to where the heart's desire is. And I knew I wanted to teach my children. I know all of us love our children. We want to be a part of everything for them. You know, in some areas and things in our life might not be where we want them to be, or we feel that we can do this. And so I had to get to that place. And so when I did end up finally getting to that place, and I felt like I was stronger spiritually, I didn't make the move. It was the Lord. We had my daughter in a Christian dance studio, and during that first month of school, we were in the dance studio, and she was taking lessons, and there was a lady there, and me and her just started talking, and she started sharing that she was homeschooling her daughter, and her daughter was in the dance class with my daughter, and And I just remember talking with her and thinking about stuff, and I just heard the Lord say, "You can do this, Ange." And I just went home, and I just remember what he said, and I was just like, okay, I feel like maybe, you know. And then a couple more things happened, and of course, you know, it's the Lord setting you up. And I just knew. I knew it was time. I knew it was the Lord, and He was saying, "You can do this." And when He says you can do something, it kind of gives you that encouragement. You can push forward. You can do this. And so it went pretty good the first 3 weeks. When I took them right out of school, I took them out in October of that year, so it can happen during a school year. But I took them out, and for the first 3 weeks, it was fun. It was interesting. I didn't use curriculum. I made up my own from books and things, which is what the homeschoolers did back in the 1960s when this whole movement started again. They just got books out of the library, and that's how they did school. And a lot of people have gone back to that way of homeschooling. It's a great way. There's so many resources out there. You don't even need textbooks. There's just so much out there now. If you ever, you know, if this is somewhere that you plan on going. But so that's why I began to homeschool, because the Lord showed me with all the things that I have always wanted. I wanted to be with my children. I didn't want to send them to school. I wanted to be around them. And all of us moms want that. And there are times, like I said, there are times where we can't move into a place that we want, or there's a deep desire, because emotionally, mentally, spiritually, there are some things that God is working on, and we just would not be able to do that. And so that was me. That's where I was at that point. And there were seeds that were being sown all the way up to that, of the desire and the passion. And if you've ever read a homeschool blog, or listened to a homeschool mom share her story, I'm sure it's going to be similar in some ways to mine. Just that desire, and just the way that God opened up the door. And so that's how I began. And these last years have been pretty amazing. We definitely have had our hiccups. But that's life, right? You face challenges in anything you step out in, but that's part of growth. The thing with the Lord that I love is that I've heard this shared on Adventures in Odyssey. If any of you listen to Focus on the Family's Adventure in Odyssey, we love Wits and John Avery Whitaker. Great stories and laughs, and we use that a lot for school, and just it's great communication and great family values and things that help us. But as a side note, but there was one of the audios that we were listening to one night, and the Lord used it this year with me, and it was about making mistakes. And he shared about Thomas Edison, and how Thomas Edison failed over 1,000 times to get that light bulb the way that it needed to be, to work the way it needed to work. And the Lord reminded me that, you know, it's not really failures. Yeah, we fail, but they're actually little successes each time, because you see what doesn't work and you see what works. And so eventually you start to shape that thing that you are desiring, that he has for you. And so everything that we go through, everything that we're experiencing, we're always moving towards something that he has put in our heart. And if we trust him, he's leading us to that thing that we desire. It may look a mess sometimes, but that's because we're in the growth period. We're growing. It's just like our children. And so homeschool is a great learning experience in that way, of seeing our desires, but also as we watch our children, and all those hiccups and things that happen in their lives as they're maturing and growing. And so with this, the homeschool thing for us that we enjoy. Hi again. So the thing that with the homeschool that we find, that the reason why I went to homeschool, and I shared that mainly with the desires of the heart and what the Lord knew was in our heart. And each woman, the Lord knows the desires in our heart. So for homeschooling, for anyone who might be interested, or has thought of it in the past and didn't know how to start, or or what to do or where to begin. Know that those desires, God knows those. And I know you probably think about that. Lord, you know this. You talk to him. He knows these things about you. He knows your heart. He knows what you really desire. And he knows how to bring it to fulfillment. So if this is something that any lady would be asking, there is a chance that I'll be able to answer any questions later. But that is our why, because that desire was already planted deep in my heart, just to be able to teach my children and to be there and to see those God-given talents and gifts just to flourish. And the other thing I was saying was my life as a homeschool mom. Starting out, I had a lot of past things that were going to have to get worked out, but they can only be worked out once I stepped into the role. Just as like when we all want to be married, and you can't work out those things in you, in some things in your life, until you actually step out and you actually become married, right? Those things can't be worked out until you're in a close relationship with your husband. And then of course when you have children, and then you have to work those relationships out. So all these things have to happen once you are in the midst of it. It's like jumping in with both feet, right? And so like in marriage and with homeschooling, jumping in with both feet, there was a lot to learn. And in me, there were things becoming a homeschool mom that I had to relearn, that the Lord had to do for me. One of those was, how am I going to fill all the requirements? And how am I going to do everything that the state, has put down as I have to talk about this that my children are doing, and all the hows and whats and whys that come with that, with anything that you do, because now you're the role of the teacher. And like we were discussing before, you have been the teacher since day one. You had that role. You never lost that role. And even after you send your children to school, you're still the teacher, because they come home to you and you get to fill all those roles that you've been doing since they were born. So as I was learning about the rules and the regulations and things, I had to find people who were veterans, who had gone before me. And I love the Lord gives us that, because it's so hard when you feel like you're alone. And you're not alone. There are so many women, so many families that are doing these things. So you're never alone. It's always, God never puts us alone. He puts the orphan in a family. He puts those who are fatherless in a family. And it's just like that even in a homeschool community. There are so many people out there. And you will find there are so many versions of homeschool as well. So never get afraid of that kind of thing either. Because we're all different. We all are going to do things differently. I share why I homeschool, and I'm sure that might hit the heart of many of you because of your own desires, and it brings up your own passions, but also how it is as being a homeschool mom and being a daughter of God, and knowing his heart and knowing how he has put gifts and talents in each of our children, and that I want to see those things fulfilled just as you do, wherever they are, and watching the passions grow inside them and seeing their faces come alive when they are enjoying who they are. And you know that for yourself. When you enjoy something, you're coming alive. You're being you, the real you. Raw and organic is what I love to say to one of my friends who loves that way I say things. But it's just the real you. It's the true you. You feel free and you feel alive. And so as a homeschool mom, in the beginning, I had a lot of things I had to go through. I had to clear out all the rules and regulations that were in my brain, that I had to do things a certain way. And when I talked to other homeschool moms, many of them had their own versions of what to do. Some were very simplified, some wanted a very specific way of doing things when they shared with the school district what they did. It depends on where you're at and what you feel the need to do. It's definitely a prayer thing, but it's also part of you, and God knows you, so you and him will figure that out. But it's never something to worry about. And as I went along, I would hear the Holy Spirit say all the time, Ange, just relax, they're learning. Just relax, they're learning. And I did have a breakdown a couple times, but that was because I was so stuck on how to get done, and they're not doing enough, and they're not